She was born in a place where dreams learned to whisper before they learned to breathe. A small American town where mornings smelled like old coffee and long habits. Where people believed life had already chosen its favorites. And girls like her were meant to follow the lines drawn by others. Her mother worked 2 jobs and came home tired but gentle. Her hands were always rough and warm at the same time. Her father left early, not with anger but with silence. And silence stayed behind like a shadow that never moved. As a child, she learned to listen more than speak. She learned how adults smiled while hiding disappointment. She learned that being brave did not always look loud. Sometimes it looked like getting up again without anyone clapping. School hallways felt narrow even when they were wide. Teachers talked about potential, but their eyes never stayed on her long. Friends talked about futures that felt borrowed. And she smiled along while carrying a different weight inside her chest. At night, she would lie awake staring at the ceiling, imagining a life that felt warmer than the one she could touch. She did not know the words for ambition yet. She only knew there was something inside her that refused to sleep. When she was 16, she took a job at a grocery store, stocking shelves, watching people pass her like waves. Some looked tired, some looked hopeful, most looked lost. She wondered if this was how adulthood began. Every paycheck went into helping her mother. Every thank you felt heavier than praise. Because love sometimes asks without words. And she gave because it was easier than explaining her hunger for more. There was a notebook she kept hidden under her bed, its pages filled with thoughts that had no safe place outside. Stories about women who survived storms. Stories where pain did not win in the final moment. She wrote when the house was quiet. She wrote when the world felt too loud. Her words were not perfect, but they were honest. And honesty felt like freedom, even if only on paper. One evening, a customer left behind a folded flyer. A community college scholarship workshop. She stared at it for a long time before folding it into her pocket. Her heart raced like she had stolen something precious. That night, she told her mother with a trembling voice. Her mother listened without interrupting, then smiled, the kind of smile that holds fear and hope together, and said, "You should try even if it scares you." Trying felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Everyone around her warned about falling, but no one talked about flying. And she wondered if courage was simply choosing to step forward. The workshop room smelled like old books and fresh beginnings. Other students spoke confidently about goals and plans. Her voice shook when it was her turn, but she spoke anyway and did not stop. She talked about working nights and dreaming days, about watching life from the sidelines, about wanting to become someone her younger self could believe in. And when she finished, the room was quiet. For a moment, she thought she had failed. Then a woman at the front nodded slowly, her eyes soft and serious at the same time, and said, "Stories like yours deserve space." Walking home that night, the air felt different. The streetlights seemed warmer. The future no longer felt like a locked door. It felt like a path hidden but real. She did not win anything that day. No applause, no instant miracle. But something inside her shifted, like the first crack of light through a closed window. That was the night she stopped asking if she was allowed to dream, and started asking how far she was willing to go. She woke up the next morning before the alarm. The sky still dark, the house still quiet. But her thoughts were already moving, like they had finally been given permission. At the grocery store, she moved differently. Still polite, still careful. But something behind her eyes had changed. She was no longer just passing time. She started noticing small things. How people avoided looking tired. How women carried invisible stories in their posture. How everyone seemed to be surviving something quietly. At night, she returned to her notebook. Her writing deeper, less afraid. She wrote about her mother's strength. About leaving without leaving anyone behind. Weeks passed and the workshop stayed in her mind. She replayed the woman's words again and again. "Stories like yours deserve space." The sentence followed her everywhere. She applied for the scholarship with hands that shook, filling out forms between shifts, writing essays late into the night. Each word felt like a small confession. When the acceptance email came, she stared at the screen for a long time, afraid to breathe, afraid to hope. Then she cried silently so no one would hear. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispered pride into her hair. Not loud, not dramatic, but strong enough to last. Community college was not glamorous, but it felt like opening a window. Classrooms filled with second chances. People who had failed before and returned anyway. She sat in the back at first, listening more than speaking, learning how ideas were shaped, learning how voices were used. There was a professor who noticed her questions, who asked her to stay after class, who told her she had something rare, a way of seeing that could not be taught. For the first time, someone spoke about her future, as if it were real and reachable. Not fragile, not borrowed, but hers. She began to believe slowly, carefully, like someone learning to walk again. Every small success felt dangerous, as if it could disappear at any moment. Money was still tight. Sleep was still short. Some nights she questioned everything, wondering if dreaming was selfish. But every time she thought of quitting, she remembered the grocery store aisles, the quiet resignation in tired faces. And she kept going. One afternoon she was asked to read her writing aloud. Her hands trembled, her voice almost broke. But the room listened. Really listened. When she finished, there was silence. Then applause that felt unreal. She did not smile immediately. She just breathed. After class, another student approached her. Said, "Your story sounded like my life." Said, "Thank you for saying what I could not." And she realized words could connect strangers. That night she walked home slower, feeling the weight and power of being heard. She understood that courage could spread, quietly, person to person. Opportunities did not suddenly rain down. She was still unknown, still ordinary. But her confidence grew roots, deep and steady. She started submitting her work online. Small platforms, small audiences. Each rejection hurt. Each acceptance healed something old. Her mother watched proudly from a distance, never interfering, never doubting, trusting her daughter to build something new, even when it meant letting go. There were setbacks. Grades slipped when exhaustion won. Bills piled up without mercy. Fear returned uninvited. One winter night, she sat alone, considering dropping out. Her notebook open but empty. Her chest heavy with doubt. She called the professor, expecting a short, polite conversation. Instead, he listened patiently, then reminded her why she started. He said, "You are not behind. You are building something real. And real things take time, especially for people who started with less." She cried after the call, not from sadness, but from relief, from being seen again. She stayed. She pushed through. She learned how to balance hope and realism, without losing herself. By the end of the year, she stood taller. Not because life was easier, but because she knew she could endure and still create. She did not know where the road would lead, but she knew she was walking it now. Not waiting, not apologizing, just moving forward. The second year arrived without ceremony. No trumpet, no warning. Just another morning where she tied her shoes and chose to keep going. Her days became fuller, heavier. Classes during daylight, work during evenings, writing squeezed into the quiet cracks of night. Exhaustion lived with her now, not as an enemy but as a companion. A reminder that she was reaching beyond comfort, into something that mattered. She transferred to a state university, a place that felt larger, louder. Buildings tall enough to make her feel small again. Voices confident enough to awaken old doubts. She walked across campus feeling invisible, surrounded by students who spoke fluently about internships and connections. Their confidence polished and practiced. Her own still raw and learning. There were moments she felt like an intruder, as if someone would eventually point her out, say she did not belong here, that she had arrived by mistake. But she kept attending classes, kept raising her hand even when her heart raced, kept submitting work that came from truth rather than perfection. And slowly she found her rhythm. She met a group of women who studied late together, each from different backgrounds, each carrying invisible battles. They shared notes, laughter, and survival stories. For the first time, she felt part of something. Not because she fit perfectly, but because no one expected her to. They accepted her honesty, her quiet strength. Her writing evolved. It became sharper, deeper, less about escape and more about understanding. She wrote about women who chose themselves. One essay went viral on a small platform, shared by strangers who felt seen. Messages poured in quietly, urgently. People thanking her for telling their story. She read every message carefully, holding each one like a fragile gift, realizing her voice could travel. Even when she stayed still, with attention came pressure, expectations from others, fear of disappointing people who believed in her, fear of losing the magic if she tried too hard. She questioned whether success would change her, whether being heard meant losing something sacred. The simplicity of writing only for herself, the safety of anonymity. Her mother reminded her gently that growth does not erase roots, that becoming more does not mean forgetting where you came from, that she carried home inside her. Money struggles returned in waves. Rent rose, hours were cut. She skipped meals more than she admitted, and pride kept her silent. One night, she fainted from exhaustion, woke up on a cold floor, the room spinning with warning, her body asking for mercy. That moment forced her to pause, to acknowledge limits, to understand that strength also meant rest, and asking for help. Her friends stepped in without judgment. Shared food, shared space, shared care. She learned that independence did not mean isolation. That community was also power. She applied for grants, fellowships, writing programs. Rejection letters stacked quietly. But acceptance came too. Slow and steady like rain after drought. A literary magazine published her work. Not prominently, not dramatically, but enough to make her hands shake. Enough to make it real. She held the printed page in disbelief. Her words inked and permanent. Proof that she existed beyond her fears. Beyond survival mode. During winter break she returned home. The town unchanged. Grocery store aisles still full of tired faces. She saw herself there again. But this time she felt gratitude, not regret. She understood that beginnings did not define endings. That humble places could birth powerful voices. That survival could become art. She visited her old high school. Spoke to a small group of girls. Her voice calm, her story honest. No promises, just truth. She told them courage was not loud. That fear does not disappear. That choosing yourself feels lonely at first, but it builds something unbreakable. Driving back to campus, she felt grounded. No longer chasing approval. No longer running from her past. She carried it forward with intention. She knew challenges would continue. That success was not a straight line. But she trusted herself now. And trust changed everything. She stopped comparing her journey. Stopped measuring worth through speed. She learned to honor persistence. And the quiet victories along the way. As spring approached, she felt a shift. Not dramatic, not sudden, but deep. Like roots growing unseen. She was no longer asking for permission. To exist, to speak, to dream. She was simply doing it. One honest step at a time. Spring arrived softly. Not with celebration, but with longer days and warmer light. And she felt herself breathing easier. Her final year moved quickly. Assignments, deadlines, expectations. The weight of what came next pressing gently but constantly. Graduation no longer a distant idea. She received an email one quiet afternoon. An editor from a national publication. They had read her work. They wanted to talk. Her hands shook as she reread the message. Afraid it might disappear. Afraid of hoping too hard. Afraid of stepping into a bigger room. The call was brief, respectful. No grand promises, no illusions. Just interest, curiosity, and possibility. Enough to keep her awake that night. She began interning remotely. Unpaid, uncertain, but real. Writing between classes and shifts. Learning how stories were shaped for the world. Feedback was honest, sometimes sharp. She learned how to accept critique without shrinking. How to protect her voice while growing. How to revise without erasing herself. Imposter syndrome returned quietly, whispering that she was temporary. That someone like her could be replaced easily. That she was still borrowing space. On the hardest days, she remembered the floor she fainted on. The grocery store aisles. The nights her mother came home exhausted. And she kept going. Her graduation day arrived without fanfare. A rented gown, a borrowed cap. Her mother in the crowd crying openly. Pride shining brighter than fear. Walking across the stage, she felt everything at once. Gratitude, grief, relief, disbelief. She had made it here. Against odds no one had counted. After graduation, the uncertainty deepened. Applications sent, resumes unanswered. Savings thin, patience tested. Success refusing to arrive on schedule. She moved into a small apartment. Bare walls, second-hand furniture. Freedom mixed with fear. But it was hers. Rejections came faster than opportunities. Each one cutting a little deeper. Each one forcing her to confront doubt. And choose resilience again. She took temporary work editing transcripts. Writing marketing copy. Anything that paid without stealing her soul. Anything that kept her close to words. Late one evening, she received another email. This one shorter. More direct. An offer to publish her essay nationally. She read it slowly, letting each word settle. Her heart pounding with recognition. This was not imagined. The essay was shared widely. Comments flooded in. Women from across the country seeing themselves in her words. Thanking her for saying what they carried. Interviews followed cautiously. She chose honesty over polish. Truth over performance. She refused to become a version that felt false. With attention came responsibility. She learned her words could heal or harm. That storytelling required care, especially when representing lived pain. She began mentoring young writers quietly, answering messages late at night, encouraging persistence without promising ease, being the voice she once needed. Her relationship with her mother deepened. Less about survival, more about shared pride, about watching each other grow. They talked about the past openly now. The sacrifices, the silence, the fear. Healing unfolded slowly. Not perfectly, but sincerely. She was invited to speak on a panel, surrounded by accomplished women. Her voice steady despite nerves. Her presence earned, not gifted. She realized then that bravery was cumulative, built from thousands of small choices. To stay, to speak, to try, even when unseen. Money stabilized gradually. Not abundance, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to plan. She signed a modest book deal. Nothing extravagant, but real. A beginning. The manuscript demanded honesty, forced her to revisit wounds, to write through discomfort, to trust that truth mattered. There were days she wanted to stop, to protect herself from memory. But she remembered the girls she spoke to, the messages that arrived quietly. She finished the draft on a rainy night, alone but full, knowing the story was no longer just hers. It belonged to anyone who needed it. She stood by the window afterward, watching the city lights, feeling both small and infinite, rooted and rising. She understood then that arrival was an illusion, that life continued to unfold. But she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had built a voice, and learned how to stand inside it. The months after the manuscript were quiet in an unfamiliar way. Not empty, not lonely, but still. Like standing after a long storm. Without constant deadlines, she felt exposed, as if movement had been protecting her. And now she had to sit with herself. Without distraction, doubt returned wearing a new face. Whispering, what if this is the peak? What if you have already said everything worth hearing? What if silence follows? She learned that growth brings new fears. Not the fear of starting, but the fear of sustaining. Of remaining honest without repeating herself. Edits came slowly, thoughtfully. Each suggestion a negotiation. Between clarity and authenticity. Between polish and truth. She fought for sentences that mattered. For moments that felt raw. She refused to smooth the pain into something pretty. She wanted readers to feel it. The publisher suggested changes for market appeal. She listened carefully. Compromised where she could. Held firm where it mattered. She learned that courage in success looked different. It meant protecting the core, even when pressure arrived quietly, wrapped in opportunity. Her book announcement went live online. No billboard, no countdown. Just a post shared and reshared, carried by people who believed in her voice. Messages came again. From women in small towns. From daughters of tired mothers. From readers who said, I thought I was alone. She answered when she could. Read when she could not. The weight of being seen heavier than expected. But also sacred. She visited her hometown for the launch. The local library hosted a reading. Chairs filled slowly. Familiar faces mixed with strangers. She stood at the podium, hands steady, voice clear, reading words that once lived only in secret, now belonging to the room. She saw her mother in the front row, listening with tears and pride, and understood that legacy was not money or fame. It was healing carried forward. After the reading, a young girl approached her, eyes bright and unsure. Said, "I want to write, but I am scared." She smiled gently and said, "Me too." That night, she walked through old streets, remembering who she had been, not with shame, but with gratitude. She realized she no longer needed to outrun her past. It walked beside her now, integrated, understood. A source, not a wound. Back in the city, life resumed. Interviews, emails, expectations. She learned to say no, to guard her energy carefully. Success did not erase struggle. It reframed it. Every level asked new questions, demanded new boundaries. She built routines slowly. Morning walks, quiet writing hours, moments of rest without guilt. Learning sustainability. She began a second project, not because she had to, but because something inside stirred again. A new truth asking for space. This time the fear felt different, less paralyzing, more respectful. A reminder that meaning was present. She trusted herself now, not blindly, but deeply. She knew she could navigate uncertainty. She received criticism publicly for the first time. Sharp opinions, careless words. She read them once, then chose not to live there. She remembered that not every voice deserved access. That boundaries were an act of self-respect, not arrogance. Through it all, she stayed connected. To friends who knew her before recognition. To her mother who kept her grounded. To herself who kept listening inward. One evening, she sat alone again. Notebook open. The same posture as years ago, but a different woman. She wrote without urgency, without performance, just truth flowing gently, like coming home. She understood then that bravery was not a moment. It was a practice, chosen again and again. In quiet rooms, she smiled softly, knowing the journey continued, not upward endlessly, but inward and outward in balance. Time moved differently after that, not rushed, not stagnant, but intentional, as if she had finally learned its language. The second project demanded patience. It refused to arrive in neat scenes. It asked for listening more than effort, for presence rather than force. She traveled for the first time because of her work. Small events, quiet universities, community centers. Rooms filled with people who came to feel understood, not impressed. Each city carried echoes. Different accents, same emotions. Stories of women choosing survival than choosing themselves. She listened as much as she spoke. In hotel rooms, she felt the old loneliness return. But it no longer scared her. She knew how to sit with it, how to let it pass without swallowing her. There were moments of exhaustion, of smiling when she wanted silence, of being visible when she missed anonymity. And she learned to honor both truths. Her mother worried from afar, asked if she was resting enough, if she was eating properly. Love still expressing itself through concern. They laughed more now, shared memories without heaviness, healing turning into warmth, rather than something fragile. She was invited into spaces she once watched from outside. Publishing rooms, editorial meetings, conversations where decisions were made. And she noticed how power moved. She spoke carefully but honestly, not trying to dominate, not shrinking either. She claimed her seat without apology. Sometimes she was the only one like her in the room. Background, accent, experience. She felt the weight of representation and carried it thoughtfully. She turned down opportunities that felt wrong, projects that asked her to dilute pain, to soften truth for comfort. She chose alignment over exposure. Financial stability arrived gradually. Enough to send money home. Enough to plan beyond survival. Enough to breathe without fear. She rented a brighter apartment. Windows wide open. Plants lining the sill. A space that reflected becoming. On quiet mornings, she watched the city wake. Coffee cooling in her hands. thinking about the girl she used to be, and smiling gently. She started a small scholarship fund anonymously for women like her. Not as charity, but as continuation. No press, no announcement. Just quiet impact. A circle widening beyond her visibility. Legacy taking shape in action. She faced burnout one autumn. A heaviness that dulled joy. She stopped writing for weeks. Listened to her body. Rest became a discipline. Not something earned. Something necessary. She learned again. Therapy entered her life without shame. Another tool for strength. Another way to stay honest with herself. She discovered that healing had layers. That success did not finish the work. It simply allowed deeper access to what still needed care. Her second book began to form. Less about survival. More about becoming. About choosing softness after strength. She wrote slower now. With intention. With trust. Letting silence shape sentences. Readers continued to reach out. Not expecting answers. Just connection. And she offered presence when she could. She realized she was no longer chasing impact. It was happening quietly. Naturally. Through consistency. One evening she received a letter. Handwritten. From a woman in prison. Who said, "Your book kept me alive." She held the paper with shaking hands. Understanding the weight of words. The responsibility of truth. The miracle of connection. That night she cried deeply. Not from sadness. But from meaning. From knowing why she began. She returned to her notebook again. Not to escape. But to witness. Life as it was. She wrote a single line. Bravery is staying open. Even when it hurts. She closed the book gently. Knowing the journey was not about arrival. But about remaining awake. To herself and others. The final year of that season arrived quietly. No announcement, no signal. Just a sense of fullness. Like a deep breath held and finally released. She noticed how calm no longer felt empty. How stillness did not mean absence, but presence. A grounded knowing in her body. The second book was finished without drama. No rushing, no fear. She sent it off and slept deeply that night. Trusting what she had made. Waiting returned, but it felt different. Not sharp, not anxious. More like space. Room to live without proving. She spent more time at home. Cooking slowly, calling her mother often. Listening more than speaking. Letting ordinary moments matter. Her mother visited one spring. They walked the city together. Two women shaped by effort and love. Seeing each other clearly. They talked about everything and nothing. Laughed in public without restraint. Shared silences without tension. Healing no longer a project. One afternoon her mother said, "I always knew you were strong. I just did not know how far you would go." And she held that sentence gently. The second book was received with warmth. Not louder than the first, but deeper. Readers older, quieter, more reflective. She understood then that success evolved. It did not always grow outward. Sometimes it grew inward. Into purpose. She was invited to teach a small writing class. Once a week in a community center. Students nervous, hopeful, uncertain. She recognized herself in all of them. She taught them honesty before technique. Listening before language. Courage before confidence. And watched them open. One student stayed behind after class. Said, "I never thought my life mattered enough to write." She smiled and said, "It always has. You just needed permission." She realized she had become that permission. Not through fame, but through consistency. Through staying human. There were still hard days. Moments of doubt, fatigue, grief. She did not erase them. She integrated them. She learned joy was not constant, but available. If noticed. If allowed. She walked often without destination. Letting thoughts pass like weather. Trusting her inner pace. No longer chasing urgency. Her voice matured. Less urgent, more resonant. She did not need to explain herself as much. She trusted understanding would arrive. She stopped measuring her life against others. Against timelines, expectations, milestones. She built meaning in layers. Invisible but strong. On an ordinary evening she received a message. From a young woman in her hometown. Saying, "I applied to college because of you." And she closed her eyes and breathed. Not from pride, but from awe at the way lives touched quietly, without spectacle. She thought about the grocery store again, the aisles, the faces, the girl she was. And she sent gratitude backward through time to survival. She knew she would keep writing, not because the world demanded it, but because it was how she listened, how she loved. She also knew she could stop if needed. That rest was not failure. That worth was not productivity. That being was enough. She stood by her window one last time. City lights soft and familiar. No longer symbols of escape, but of belonging. She placed her hand on her chest, feeling steady, whole, present. She understood at last. That bravery was not a single act. It was a lifetime of choosing honesty, even when unseen. Her story did not end. It continued quietly. In classrooms, in letters, in late-night notebooks. In lives she would never meet. And somewhere a girl lay awake, in a small room, feeling something stir. Because a voice had reached her. And that was enough.